Um, and okay. And first, I just want to mention a couple of mechanics before we begin. Everybody here will be muted for now so that we can focus on the speakers. After the four presenters are done, we're going to have a question and answer session. So you can each raise your hand. If you would each just check on the Manage Participants menu or Participants menu on the bottom of your screen. If you would, just try raising your hand, if anybody would do that, and then that will just show me that you all know how to raise your hand. And if anybody feels like it, just give that a try right now. A couple of you are doing that. Great, thank you. And we're just going to keep you muted, but you can always raise your hand if anybody needs to say anything. And let's see. Also, some of you have video on, some of you have video off. That's fine either way. But most of what we'll be doing is we'll be sharing screens from the presenters. So we're about to get started. Let's see. And Tony just sent a message. Oh, and once you've raised your hand, you can click again on your hand to lower it. So 1 second, let's just make sure everybody's in, and then we're about to get started. Okay, so we're going to begin by turning this over to the founder of World Beyond War, David Swanson. Take it away, David.
Thanks, Mark. Let me know if you can't hear me okay. Co-founder is the technically accurate term. This organization got put together back in late 2013, around January 2014, really started up. I had written a book that past year, a short book making an argument for abolishing all war. I think it was called War No More, The Case for Abolition. And David Hartso, a longtime peace activist and author, read my book, thought we should start a new organization, persuaded me of the same, proposed to raise some initial funds, and we got started. And we got started not because there weren't any peace groups anywhere in the world or the United States, but because there wasn't a group organized to critique educationally and to go after nonviolently through activism the entire institution of war. And to do so, organizing people globally, not within particular borders. And to do so with this combination of education and activism. And, you know, we looked around and saw wonderful work being done for peace, organizations opposing particular wars, particular weapons, particular bases. We wanted to support all of that. But we saw this general argument of, don't do this war because we need the troops better prepared for a better war. Don't buy this weapon because the Pentagon doesn't even want it. We want the weapons that really work and kill more people more efficiently. And so all these arguments against war that were supporting the institution. And we wanted to go after the whole institution because even though it seems more radical, it actually makes more sense to people when you sit down with them and talk for more than 8 seconds. You're not trying to distinguish a good war from the bad wars, which is a feat that no one can do. You're critiquing an institute, and when you critique the institution, then you get to do what World Beyond War has been developing for the past 3.5 years, and that is examine how war is not just the most immoral thing we do, not just the place where all the money's going that's needed for other things, but is the biggest destroyer of the natural environment, and is the biggest eroder of civil liberties, and is the biggest siphoner off of wealth, and is the biggest corrupting force in our culture in terms of promoting violence and vengeance and bigotry of various sorts. And so we proposed that going after this critique of the whole institution, we can also organize a bigger coalition, because the top enemy of anyone who's after funds for schools or expansion of civil liberties or defense of the natural environment or almost anything else under the sun ought to be the Pentagon. And none of them on their own are doing it. And so we've actually had some success in building coalitions, persuading coalitions to use a different sort of language, persuading coalitions to include peace along with other issues, to integrate these. We've had conferences on how topics like the environment and anti-war work with each other. We've in recent days and weeks been working with the Poor People's Campaign that makes these arguments as well. I want to share my screen for a second and look at a little bit of some of the educational arguments that we've used. You should be seeing my screen at the moment, and if you don't want to, if you want to get out of it and it's ruining everything you're multitasking on, you can hit close full screen or escape. You can also slide the window out of the way that has everybody's little video image in it. But this is, let me see if I can full screen this here. This is part of what we've had for these past 3.5 years on the WorldBeyondWar.org website, and which I'm in the process of updating and redoing, and in fact adding another myth to this list, namely that war is just. I wrote a book last year called War is Never Just, critiquing just war theory, which I've found very useful for doing public debates with people who believe in a just war, and I've found these debates to be very useful in reaching people outside the chorus. Looking at these myths, and in different parts of the world, there are other myths one has to address, including cherished wars like World War II or cherished figures like founding fathers. But these are sort of universal. I mean, there is a huge percentage of the human population that needs this sort of information. The evidence that we can present at greater length than here, that war is not in our genes, not natural, not permanent, etc. And then that war is not defensive, it's not needed for defense. There are other ways to defend. We've published and are updating annually a book called An Alternative Global Security System that is presenting ways in which we can think of defense differently and alternative structures and systems to those of massive organized violence. War is not beneficial. The humanitarian wars do not benefit humanity, etc. I can't go into the arguments on this call, but we then look at, as I touched on, the various reasons to end war that include not just that a particular war is immoral, but that were the impossible to take place and some war in the future to be proclaimed just on its own terms, it would also have to outweigh all the incredible damage done year after year by pouring all of our funds that are needed for good things into this criminal enterprise. The damage to the environment, the damage in counterproductively endangering those whose governments engage in it, eroding our liberties, impoverishing us, the trade-offs that are missed by dumping $2 trillion a year. This is another reason, a small one perhaps, but a big one in a certain numerical sense, to talk about the whole institution. People come up with these figures, how many hundreds of billions of dollars a nation like the United States, for example, has spent on wars in recent years, which is quite a slick bit of pop propaganda because it redefines much of military spending as somehow being for something other than wars. If you look at all military spending, it's about $1 trillion a year from the United States alone, and about $2 trillion from all nations, many of whom, of course, are allies and mutual weapons dealers and customers. So going through these reasons why is a big part of our educational efforts. And if I were to continue this presentation, it goes further into how to end war and the numerous steps beyond education, structural changes, systemic changes, advancements in the rule of law, treaties, steps toward accountability, and and truth and reconciliation, disarmament, divestment from weaponry, closing of bases, diplomacy, advancement of aid and cooperation and friendship, etc. So these are all campaigns that we're working on that are steps toward the total abolition of war and are framed in that way and educationally are directed that way, but of course are not the complete abolition of war, each step in itself. So this is something we're working on, and we've grown now as an organization from a handful of volunteers aiming to be something global and something enormous to become quite a large group of volunteers that is somewhat global, thinking globally, and growing rapidly, so that people have signed our pledge to help end all war in 158 countries and growing. Not quite yet the 175 that the Pentagon thanks the troops for watching the basketball game from, but getting there. And we have staff. We have myself as halftime staff. We have a wonderful education coordinator in Tony Jenkins as halftime staff. We have a wonderful new organizing director in Greta Zarro on halftime. And Leah Bolger, who I'm about to introduce here, is chair of our coordinating committee and is volunteer like everybody else. Mark is a volunteer, and many of the rest of you who've been doing a lot of great work with World Beyond War are volunteers. So we're working on building something with volunteers and figuring out how to raise more funding and enlarge the organization. We're starting chapters, we're bringing in affiliates. Our next conference, annual conference, will be in Toronto, Canada in September. You'll find it on the front of WorldBeyondWar.org. I could go on for hours about what we've got planned, but I think a number of other people are going to do a better job of that. Starting with Leah Bolger, who I think is on next. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that's correct.
Leah has been the chair of our coordinating committee and has been central and involved in building World Beyond War to what it is now from the beginning, and it wouldn't be anything without her. Here's Leah, and I'm going to mute myself.
So, hey, everybody. Nice to be here. I'm excited about World Beyond War's very first webinar. David stole my thunder. He said a lot of stuff I was going to tell you, but I will spend my extra time talking about myself, because I know that's what you want to hear about. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. And I lived there until I was a freshman in high school. And then my family moved to Warrensburg, Missouri, a town of 13,000 people, about 60 miles southeast of Kansas City. And Warrensburg is the home of Central Missouri State University, home of the Fighting Mules. Yeah, that's a little funny line. So I ended up going to school there because it was economical and easy to do from there. I graduated in 1978 with a degree in fine art. I have a BFA in drawing and painting. And so not finding too terribly many job postings in the want ads for an artist, I figured out pretty quickly that I was going to have to do something more to live on. And so one night I was checking out. I worked at a Safeway store through college. So one night I'm mopping up the check stand and I'm thinking, what's wrong with this picture? I'd been out of college now for a couple of years, and this was not what I wanted to do the rest of my life. So anyway, I decided to join the Navy, and I will tell you, I joined the Navy because I needed a job. And I will tell you that the vast number of people who join the military join it because they need a job or they want the money for education to go to college. And it's either one or the other. If they're 18 years old and they have parents that can afford to send them to a four-year school, that's what they're going to do. Or if they have no college there's no assets to pay for them to go to college, they need a job. And so this is why recruiters prey on kids in rural areas that there isn't much opportunity, or poor, funded schools in the urban areas. Recruiters know that these kids are easy prey. So I joined because I needed a job, and because I already had my degree. I went to Officer Candidate School, and I was commissioned in 1980 as an ensign. I was in the Navy for 20 years. I was stationed in 4 foreign countries, Iceland, Bermuda, Japan, and Tunisia. I really did join the Navy and see the world, and that's a good thing that I got out of it. So I didn't really give a lot of thought to, do I really want to be a part of the military machine? I am a product of public education and small state university. And frankly, I knew very little of America, foreign policy in South America and CIA operations. I didn't know all this stuff. And I joined the military pretty much, ignorant of these things. So after I got out of the military is when I started rethinking things. So my husband and I retired. He was also retired from the Navy on the same day. We sold all our furniture and we moved onto a sailboat. And we lived on the sailboat for a couple of years, and it was wonderful. We went up and down the East Coast, the Bahamas. It was great. Then we sold the sailboat and bought an RV, and we did land cruising for a couple of years. And then we moved to where I am now, Corvallis, Oregon, and we've been here since 2004. So after we moved here is when I started kind of getting involved. I started out by just joining Veterans for Peace as an at-large member. I was just a member. I wasn't organizing really with VFP. But then I did get more and more involved with VFP. I did form a chapter. Later, I was elected to the national board. I served as the VFP national vice president for a couple of years, and then president for my final year in that term. And I began to become more and more involved, but not really passionate, I wouldn't say, about it, until I do have a pivotal moment. And people always ask me, how did you turn from warrior to peacenik? Well, I never was a warrior. I was a fine arts major. But how did I turn from somebody kind of ambivalent to being a peace activist? Well, what happened was I saw an exhibit that was created by the American Friends Service Committee called Eyes Wide Open. And this exhibit was about the Iraqi fatalities and the fatalities that were a result of the Iraq War, the second Iraq War. So the exhibit consisted of military boots lined up, as you see, in formal rows, as if these people were at attention or at headstones at Arlington. That's what it reminds me of. And each of the pairs of boots had dog tags on them. They had little mementos, stuffed animals or keepsakes, flowers. And then surrounding the American military boots were these civilian shoes to represent the Iraqis that were killed. And this exhibit, I had a visceral reaction to it. It just hit me in the gut, and I was sobbing. I just was so moved by this exhibit, and that truly is my epiphany moment, how I became a really very active activist. So I became more and more knowledgeable. I started learning about things. I became more and more outraged about what the United States was doing its foreign military policy. And so I had worked for Veterans for Peace for some time. And VFP really emphasizes the F in VFP. In fact, they capitalize it when they write Veterans for Peace. And I was really kind of tired of being for peace. I wanted to be against war. And I know a lot of people want to be for something. They don't want to work against something. But I am not ashamed to say I am anti-war. I am anti-cancer. I'm anti-child abuse. And I don't see any reason to shy away from saying I'm anti-war. And also, I think, there's many, many things we can do to make the world a peaceful place or a more peaceful place. And it doesn't have anything to do with ending war. So I was looking for something that really addressed war, the institution of war. And then at virtually the same time, David contacted me about his idea about what became World Beyond War. So I had met David in 2006 when we were at Camp Democracy. He stayed in touch with him, and he got in touch with me and asked me if I would be interested. And I said, absolutely, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So as David mentioned, I've been with him since the very beginning. I'm currently the coordinating committee chair. And our coordinating committee has about 14 people. And we don't have a board of directors. That is how we operate, as the coordinating committee, and I'm the chair of it. And I really, not technically staff, but I think of myself as staff because I work very closely with David, Greta, and Tony. And but other parts of our organization were very, very important. Our chapters. Groups can become a chapter if they're interested in supporting the work of World Beyond War in their current surroundings, their communities. We can have affiliates. These are organizations that are already formed who want to connect their names with World Beyond War. And then country coordinators, and this is arguably the most important part of our organizing, because as David said, we have members in 158 different countries. And so Greta is working to identify people in those countries that can be as the leadership of the country for World Beyond War. And so right now we have 75,000 people who've taken the pledge, 500 organizations, and 158 countries. And I get so excited when I think about the potential organizing power that we have with people virtually in every part of the world. And that's what I think we are really onto a good start and ending war together, because we know it's going to have to happen internationally. That's all I have for you. Thank you. Next to speak is Greta.
Thanks, Leah. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name's Greta Zarro. I'm the organizing director for World Beyond War. And as Leah said, I really work with our volunteers, chapters, and affiliated organizations around the world on our educational events and our campaigns. I'm going to share my screen now. I have a little bit of a PowerPoint to walk you through some of our campaigns and what it means to do grassroots organizing. Oh, Mark, you need to enable screen sharing. Perfect. Can you see it? Great. Okay. So as everyone's mentioned, we are a decentralized global grassroots network, and we're really run by mostly volunteers. I also wanted to mention that we're member-driven in the sense that we don't take money from corporations and we don't take money from governments anywhere around the world. So we're also funded by individuals who give as little as $5 a month. We have a two-pronged approach in our approach to working for war abolition, and that is number one, education, and Tony will follow me and talk about some of our educational campaigns, and number two, the direct action organizing, which is where we take the education and really put it into play by using our strength in numbers, our people power, to put pressure on decision makers who can make the policy changes that we're looking for. So what is grassroots organizing? Grassroots organizing is, like I said, using your strength as citizens, as residents, as voters of an area and using that people power to put targeted pressure on a decision maker, such as an elected official, a CEO of a corporation, to make a certain change that you're looking for. And in this case, abolishing war, and as David mentioned, all the steps that need to happen to reach war abolition. And so in grassroots organizing, you need to set clear goals of what your specific goal is that you want. Let's say in this case, divesting your city from weapons. And then you need to figure out who is the policymaker that can actually divest your city. Is it your city council member? Is it your mayor? And then using certain tactics that sway that decision maker to make that change. So these are some common tactics that are used in grassroots organizing. For example, the petition, which is an entry point, really, to get people to sign on to the issue. It's their way of buying into the issue. And as you collect petition signatures, you're building out that people power that I've referred to amass the numbers that you need for your campaign. Phone banking is another great tactic that's often used in grassroots organizing. And phone banking means generating lots of calls into the office of your decision maker. And especially if you're working on a very local level, this can be extremely powerful because, for example, a state senator might not get any calls usually into their district office. So if they start getting 100, 200, 500 calls about an issue, that's going to make a difference. I put sign-on letter here. This is also a very common tactic used in organizing that you might have seen. So a sign-on letter is also directed at your elected official or other decision maker about the issue. And it's really a way of showing a diversity of support on the issue. So for example, showing the faith groups in a community, local businesses, community groups, neighborhood associations, parent-teacher associations, showing a diversity of mixed types of groups that have signed on to the campaign in support of your issue. So as I go through these different tactics, you also might notice that they kind of scale up in escalation. So like I mentioned, that petition is the entry-level point. But then as you're going along a campaign, depending on the decision maker and how much you need to pressure them, you might need to escalate your tactics and go from something like a petition or a phone banking or a sign-on letter to showing your strength in massive numbers, like through a rally or a march or even a sit-in where you sit in their office and actually block entry to the office of your decision maker. The next tactic that I have on here is bird dogging, which I think is an interesting one. Not sure if people have heard about this one before. Bird dogging is essentially showing up unannounced at your decision maker's event. So for example, a decision maker, elected official, let's say a governor, might have a fundraiser and you show up and have a protest outside of their fundraiser where they wouldn't expect your group to be there with signs about your issue. So basically everywhere they go publicly, let's say they show up and have a float at the Memorial Day parade, you're there next to their float with your anti-war sign. So that's kind of what bird dogging is. And finally, I've put down media. And for a volunteer or an activist, what I mean by media is really doing letters to the editor or op-eds or articles for your local newspaper. And number one, that's a way to get the issue in the news. But number two, that's also a way to publicly call out your decision maker in the news. And these days with social media, you can also do it through Facebook or Twitter, for example. If you hashtag your decision maker, then they get a notification, or their staff member who is controlling their page gets a notification that they were mentioned in the news. And so that can make a big difference if, for example, 100 people hashtag their state senator on an issue that day. Okay, so this is a list of our campaigns, and I'm only going to briefly touch on them because we're going to do future webinars that really delve into these issues more in depth. But for now, I'll just quickly go through these and say, sorry about that. Number one, closed bases. As David mentioned, the U.S. has over 800 foreign military bases in 80 nations around the world. And in some ways, you could call these bases the pushpins holding up the map of empire. And so one tactic to war abolition is closing down these military bases. And we are a founding member of the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases, which is a new coalition that just kicked off in February of this year. The second campaign is divestment. David also referred to this. I put the logo here for the Divest from the War Machine Coalition. We are also one of the founding members of this coalition, which is a coalition of dozens of groups working to divest funds from weapons manufacturers. So, for example, you can divest on an individual level. You can move your own money, like if you have money invested in a certain stock, you can move that to a more socially responsible stock that's not a weapons manufacturer. But you can also scale this up from a grassroots organizing perspective and divest from, let's say, your university's funds that are invested in weapons, or your city pension funds might be invested in weapons, or even you can look larger at a state or a country level pension fund. Counter recruitment, that's another campaign that we're working on. So what that means is, for example, one of the campaigns is closing down JROTC marksmanship programs, which are programs in schools. You might have recently heard about this because it was very publicized with the recent shooting in Florida, where the shooter was actually trained in one of these JROTC programs, how he learned how to shoot a lethal weapon in this program in his high school, and then unfortunately use that against his own classmates. So we're working across the country to close down these, basically, how to shoot programs that are being taught to children as young as 13 in their schools. Two other campaigns that I'll briefly mention. The billboards campaign, I have a picture up here about one of our billboards. We're putting out billboards across the globe to raise awareness about issues of war and militarism. And finally, global justice. This is a campaign that's really about holding the U.S. and the globe accountable to international law. So to the United Nations or to the International Criminal Court, because we see on a daily basis countries like the U.S. and around the world breaking international law. And in fact, that is the topic of our current conference coming up September 21st and 22nd in Toronto. We'll be focusing on how to use law to both restrain and legitimize, unfortunately, how law is being used to legitimize war, but how we can change certain laws and develop new forms of global governance to move towards war abolition. This is a map showing the 158 countries where we have signatories on our peace pledge. And really, like I said earlier, how a petition is a first entry point, the peace pledge is really the first entry point for showing your support for working towards a world beyond war. And from there, you can get further involved, such as starting a chapter or affiliating an existing organization with World Beyond War. And we encourage you to go to WorldBeyondWar.org/find chapter to look for an existing chapter or affiliate in your area, or to start your own if there isn't one. And I'll end now and move it over to Tony, who is our education coordinator. But before I end, this is a list on the side of some of the activities that our chapters often do. And it goes well into what Tony's going to talk about, because often our chapters do start with the educational aspect first, really getting the discussion going, such as starting a book club in their area to talk about World Beyond War's book, or doing a film screening, or bringing in a guest lecture to get that conversation going and educate themselves before they move on to that campaign focus that I've talked about. And now on to you, Tony.
Thank you, Greta. That's fantastic. Greta is a truly amazing coordinator. She's keeping us all on our toes. We've really ramped up our game since she's joined us, so I'm really thankful to be able to follow her. I just want to say, so the very first slide that Greta showed us was this wonderful slide, or not the first one, one of the second ones she showed, how our whole mission revolves around education plus action. And I would add to that I think education for us, it's everything we do. Even direct action can be an educational opportunity for us. It's an opportunity for us to get people to reflecting on their experience, to learn from it, to grow from it, to become better organizers. So we try to bring that kind of educational mindset to everything we do. And I would like to express that we're, in terms of education, we think about education as both, in our work, it's both education about the abolition of war and education for the abolition of war. So on one level, we're providing resources, sharing knowledge, sharing research that works to challenge the myths of war, as David so nicely laid out for us. And then we're also trying to show the complementary, proven nonviolent, peaceful alternatives to war that can bring us more authentic security. So we're looking at that in terms of informing the public. But of course, knowledge is really only useful when people apply it, when they do something with it, if we're going to try to change and abolish war. And there's something about Leah's story and the epiphany that she shared about having to have this experience that changed her view. It's something that we can bring more intentionally into our work, which is what we try to do. So we're always trying to, in our educational resources that we develop and in our campaigns, we're trying to find ways to engage people in the different ways, to get them to think and reflect upon the assumptions they have about the war system, to engage in dialogue with their peers, to challenge assumptions together. And this is the kind of learning that can be really dynamic, that really can kind of build up political efficacy and help people move towards taking action for change. So I just want to kind of outline 2 or 3 really very quickly kind of key educational tools that we have that you should be aware of. And there are many more that we have that I certainly can't mention in the next 3 or 4 minutes. But the first piece I want to mention is something that David already brought up, and that's our book, A Global Security System, An Alternative to War. And I'm holding up for you the 2017 edition. We sometimes call this AGSS for short, which I'll do now for the next minute and a half. So AGSS, it is our effort, our publication that helps provide a blueprint for outlining an alternative security system to the war system, right? A system in which peace is pursued by peaceful means. So for us, this blueprint, it outlines the hardware of creating that peace system, so all those kinds of mechanisms and institutions that we need to manage conflict nonviolently, from global governance to tools and strategies for disarmament to international law, and also, importantly, the software of that system, the sort of values and concepts that need to guide that peace system, that uphold it. So this is the most important thing about this. I mentioned this is a 2017 edition. This is a living document for us, something that we seek to update annually. We're always trying to improve our vision and improve our roadmap, reflecting new insights and analysis of current events. This 2017 edition you can get your hands on. It's available for download for a small $2 to $5 donation in PDF, ebook, audiobook formats on our website. You can also get a hard copy via Amazon. And our 2018 edition is going to come out at our Toronto conference at the end of September. So stay tuned for that. You'll be able to get that on our website then. So to support the study of this guide, to make this even more meaningful, we also offer a free online study guide called Study War No More. And this guide can be used for independent study, or as a really great tool for any of our chapters, for facilitating dialogue and discussion around any of the issues that are outlined in it. It's also a great tool that we hope people will be integrating into secondary education and university programs and peace studies. It's just a really wonderful tool. And one of the great things about the study guide online is each of the discussion topics, there are around 20 of them, are also introduced by one of our study and action partners. And these are leading global thinkers and strategists and academics and advocates, people representing organizations that are working on components of an alternative global security system. So they provide these wonderful video introductions talking about their work. And we show that so people can see that the impossible is actually possible, that people are already working on creating the foundations of an alternative system. It's not just something that's a bunch of words in our book that we can share with you. We also offer some more engaged opportunities. We offer some online courses that are facilitated by World Beyond War experts and associated activists and change makers from around the world. Usually these are 6 to 8 week long courses. We had our first course was last year, War Abolition 101, How to Create a Peaceful World, where we dived into how we end war and the arguments against it. And just a couple weeks ago, we finished War Abolition 201, Building the Alternative Global Security System. So obviously that was, the intention there was getting people to think about that alternative system and how we can engage in action to actually build it and make it happen. And both those courses are going to likely be offered again in the near future. We'll let you know. We're also exploring other offerings related to conference themes, so we might do something related to the upcoming conference in Toronto. And other World Beyond War campaigns. Another wonderful tool that we've been recently promoting pretty actively, and you've seen some maps pop up on the different presentations. On the screen is this mapping militarism tool. And this is really a really fun and cool interactive tool that allows you to sort of visually map everything related to militarism around the world, military expenditures, military bases, troop presence, arms sales, ongoing conflicts. It also allows you to map peace. So the map that Greta shared with us, or all the people from around the world have signed World Beyond War's pledge. And the best thing about this is in the coming weeks, we're going to be coming out with some frame-worthy versions of these in some large 24 by 36-inch posters that you can use as educational tools and resources, or hang it on your wall and you can just see maps of militarism everywhere you go in your house. The myths that David outlined earlier, you can also find these, for example, right from the homepage of our website, from the main menus up at the top. For some of you who are more independently minded, we also have a rich resource center on our website that you can easily find under the House menu item, where you can find a list of really great curated books, articles, videos, quotes, flyers, posters, images, etc. All the wonderful tools you might be able to use to design your kind of own educational works. And I just want to put in a final little plug. So the billboard campaign we have coming up, we are putting up some not billboards, but bus shelter signs in Washington, D.C. One right across from a couple right near the White House, and here in a couple of weeks, in 2 weeks from now, we're going to be on the street passing out flyers next to these signs and helping to educate the public around what we can do to change our priorities and our spending, to move money from war and to money to other things, to end starvation on the planet, for example. So I hope you'll maybe come and join us there. So many more things to talk about, but I'm going to turn it over to Mark so we can get questions from you and we can engage and answer some of your thoughts.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So there are 4 ways you can let us know that you want to ask a question. The first is if you're using a computer to do this, through the participants menu, raise hand. If you're on a phone, *9 ought to do it. And you can also, if you want, and if you're one of the people whose video we can see, you could just actually physically raise your hand. And then finally, we also have a chat window. But I think the best thing is to raise hands, and we really would like to get any types of feedback, questions directed to any or all of the 4 presenters that you just heard, and would like to hear your reaction. Any volunteers? Okay, that would be Paul. Paul, please, I'm going to unmute you. Great.
Okay, in your book, A Global Security System, there's a section on civilian-based defense, which I think is excellent. Do you discuss that in any of your courses that you mentioned? Civilian-based defense.
Yeah, we were just talking about that a few weeks ago in our Abolition 201 course, and I think that would be such an important topic for even a shorter term, more focused course of a couple of weeks to really dive more deeply into that. I mean, I think that's really one of the essential components that we need to work on.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, others? Howard.
For Tony Jenkins, the Educational Coordinator. Before I ask my question, I'd like to say also thank you for including me on this. I really have a lot of respect for this rather wonderful grassroots organization. I've known David Hartsoe and David Swanson for a few years now, and I really don't see so much on the horizon that mimics this in scope and ambition. And so I'm just very pleased to be even a small part of it. My question, though, has to do with, it's a small question on the educational aspect, Tony, and a good friend of mine, David Barsamian, does an alternative radio show that's picked up by public broadcasting in about 150 different places around the country, but it's diminishing in size, and he always has some very thoughtful people who are in general opposed to war, but they're actually for responsible government. And I think a lot of the things that many of the people are in this organization would find useful. And I'm just wondering if that is part of your educational repertoire, Tony, or is it maybe a little too far afield?
Oh, me personally, I mean, certainly it's something that every one of us engages in kind of talking on radio shows and other outlets such as that. You know, Greta, David, myself, we all do aspects of that. We don't have our own radio show. David has his own sort of podcast radio show as well, which deals a lot of these issues too. So it's certainly in our field. Is that something you're thinking a little bit more specifically about something we would do, or?
I thought of inviting David to come up and be interviewed at our university in Ohio by David Barsamian, David versus David, you might say. And he does this. He has, you know, a lot of fairly active, and Noam Chomsky, for example, you know, a person that probably everybody knows. He's a very good friend of Barsamian's, and he interviews him and puts a lot of his, you know, educational materials available. And I thought that this wonderful peace initiative that you guys are trying to struggle to go for something instead of just against militarism. But to me, that would be a very valuable thing for good publicity for World Beyond War. And I thought, and so I'm trying to interest our local public broadcast guys to do that, David, you know?
Hey, Howard, could I interject a brief comment here?
Yeah, sure.
You know, some months back, I did a couple of public debates on can war ever be justified, with myself versus the guy who teaches what they call ethics at West Point Military Academy.
Perfect.
And what David Barsamian did was he recorded the first of the two debates, and because his show, Alternative Radio, is an hour, he cut it to an hour and made that one of his whole shows was this debate between myself and this militarist arguing for just wars. And because my show, I have a radio show that's only a half hour a week, I cut his show in half. And just today, coincidentally, I sent out to radio stations and posted on my radio show, which is talknationradio.org, those two shows, each of them being half of his show, which he got from recording my debate. So this is sort of just in the sense of what a small world it is point, but I think not only is it of great value to get into as good and large and global media as we possibly can, but to do so in a way that avoids the chorus. And that's what I think these debates do, is they get people's ears open who don't want them to be, by getting different crowds of people together in one room or one virtual space.
Mm-hmm. Well, you went right to the lion's mouth when you went to West Point and confronted them with some of your ideas, and you have...
What wasn't at West Point, but my debate opponent partner was works at West Point.
Basically, he was representing the military machine that you've spent a lot of your life confronting, and it was a very, I would think, a very valuable moment to hear both points of view. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's just the question I had.
So let's get to the next person. And I also just want to say again, if you would like to say anything, you could direct a question to any of the four presenters, or just make a general question or statement. The way to do it is raise hand through the participant menu if you're on a computer, and if you're on a phone, *9 ought to raise your hand. And next up is Frank. Go ahead, Frank. Frank, can anybody hear Frank? Okay, let's see. Frank, are you still there? You could send a message. Okay, let's see. I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen now then. Kathleen, you're up.
Okay, it's a short question. It's about economic conversion. Do you reach out to weapons manufacturing factories with your program and talk about their ability to continue business in areas where they'll make just as much or maybe more by converting the weapons production to the production of usable goods? Did you get that?
It's a great
yes.
question. I'm happy to take it, but I just spoke, so if somebody else wants to take it, that's great.
Go ahead, David.
Well, I would say it is a wonderful idea. It is a necessary idea. We do not get enough invitations to speak at weapons manufacturing plants. But one thing that we have done, it is something we talk about wherever we do get invited to speak. And one thing that we did quite a lot last year was work on passing resolutions through local governments saying, move the money. Saying to federal governments, move the money from weapons to useful human and environmental projects. And here are the benefits, including economic. This is not there's not an economic benefit to militarism. It's a drain economically as well.
Yeah.
As everything else that's wrong with it. And we worked in a coalition with a number of other groups, U.S. Peace Council, Code Pink, et cetera, in the United States. And one thing that U.S. Peace Council successfully did at New Haven, Connecticut City Council, that we've been pushing on other local governments, is get a requirement that they have to hold a public hearing with the head of every government agency of the city and discuss what useful things they would do as a city with all that money if they weren't giving all their local taxes to the Pentagon. And so that's I think, a very useful tool. We also promote, as Institute for Policy Studies and others have promoted, the fact that in the United States in particular, you can get grants from the federal government to help your local government study the economic benefits of conversion. So you can go to your local government and say, I'm here to bring you money to do this useful project. And so we don't want to reduce everything to economic arguments. We don't want to lose moral and many other arguments, but it is one powerful angle worth pursuing, and one on which the vast majority of people have got the facts fundamentally wrong. So there's re-education needed.
Yes, yes. The fact being, they're making money, but they're not creating a healthy society.
Right, and by and large, the population as a whole is not making money. We're losing money, but a small number of people are getting disgustingly rich.
Okay,
well,
we've got. Oh, sorry to cut you off there. We've got 3 people on queue now: Ananya, Frank, and somebody from a 617 area code. So let's start with Ananya. Posted this to the chat. I come from Switzerland, which is a neutral country. How can we make the USA a neutral country? Would anybody like to field that one? And the presenters, just unmute yourself because some of you are muted. Whoever would like to take that one.
I'm always happy to, but why doesn't somebody else take one?
I think that's a Leah question.
Well, I'll do my best. The United States is part of NATO, and NATO acts as a puppet of the United States, and it's an entity that I don't see going anywhere. I don't see any even inkling that the United States would back off and be more like Switzerland or any number of other countries, Denmark and Costa Rica and any number of them that have better quality of life. I think that the best thing, speaking of internationally, is, this is one of the reasons why we believe that the only way we're going to be able to end war is to work internationally in tandem with people thousands of people all over the world, including Switzerland, including countries that understand that there is another way. I think, you know, if you take a look at what war, how it's perceived by different entities, the United States views war as something that, yeah, we're always right, and yes, we can threaten people with force. And people who live in Costa Rica, for instance, they don't have a military, they think of war as something like, yeah, no, of course we can end war. We don't even have a military. And then, of course, people who are being bombed every day in Afghanistan, they think of war in a completely different way. So I think it's changing the mindset, changing the people's opinion that we can never end war, and helping them believe that we can, and joining mutually around the world as co-equals and not as the United States dominating.
I would add that there are a number of countries that are legally neutral countries that, unlike Switzerland, don't ever act like it. And so part of the case that we make in Ireland, for example, is that they are bound legally to act like a neutral country, and they don't. They let U.S. troops travel through their airports and off to horrific wars. And so we could use the help of Switzerland in getting together with neutral countries around the world and persuading some of them to behave as if they are neutral countries.
Okay, next, let's hear from our friend from the 617 area code who has raised your hand. Oh, I think I need to unmute you. One sec. Sorry, my bad.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Oh, hi. My name is John, calling from Cambridge, Mass. In fact, I'm a good friend of Paul, who is the first speaker.
Great.
Muted. This is a couple of sort of devil's advocate kind of questions. And before that, I really want to stress that I enormously appreciate what everybody's doing. I think we're off to an excellent start. And thanks so much for this webinar. My first question is, when you talk, suggestion at least, is that when you talk about U.S. bases around the world, I would think, and I don't know, I haven't had a chance to check your map, I would think it'd be really helpful to include at least 3 or 4 other countries. I mean, the ones that pop into mind, obviously, that are very much not even within NATO. Although maybe in the case of NATO, you might want to add, I guess, the UK and France, but definitely include China and Russia, you know, 2 other UN Security Council members. In fact, you may have all the permanent members. That might be one way to do that. My guess is, my reason for suggesting this is, especially for Americans looking at your website and so on, then it would make it clearer that World Beyond War is more than just a critique of American policy. Anyway, that's my first suggestion, if I may. Suggestion number 2 is, at least from quickly looking, I actually have a hard copy of the 2016 version of the Alternative Global Security book, so it may be a bit out of date. But looking at that, and from what I've heard so far, when it comes to World Beyond War, stressing that we really encourage alternatives, and I totally agree with that. I think that's great. But if I may suggest, from what I've seen so far, it's not all that sort of easily intelligible for the average, not well-informed layperson. If I may suggest, sort of crystallize it into maybe 4 or 6, between 4 and 6 kind of key bullet points, including, for example, civilian-based defense, United Nations, international law, to really show that there's kind of already an architecture that we can build on of a whole lot of things that have been shown to work. They are desperately, you know, under-resourced, but they do exist. Anyway, for what it's worth, here are 2 suggestions. Thank you.
I'll just respond to that last point really quickly. That's feedback we've gotten in other forums before, and we're working on that. The 2018 edition's coming out soon, so hopefully we'll make a stab at that, at clarifying that for folks. And then I see Leah wanted to respond as well.
Yeah, about the base closures, as you know, we have a phenomenal number of bases all over the world, and Veterans Repeat. Excuse me, my old ways. World Beyond War is a charter member of a relatively new coalition, the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases. The website is noforeignbases.org. And we specifically talked about, do we want this to be against all foreign military bases or just American ones? And we decided that that our organization should be just focused on the United States, because we are Americans and we want to talk about what our tax dollars are funding and how we are, dominating the rest of the world. There are some other countries that have foreign military bases, but they're a tiny number. However, they need to be, they need to be shut down as well. So this coalition, that the American coalition, has now forming an international coalition, the Global Coalition to End Foreign Military Bases, and it will be addressing all bases all over the world. We're having a conference in Dublin this November to engage with organizations all over the world who are very, very interested in this issue, as well they should be, since they have our bases in theirs, in their countries. So there is work being done on closing the bases. I think it's low-hanging fruit that we should be jumping on, but there's work on going towards others, not just the United States.
And I would encourage, John, is it, if you have data on the other countries that you mentioned in the bases, we'd love to collect that. We're dependent on volunteers like you to get us that information. It's easy to become U.S.-centric because we have such an offensive posture when it comes to security.
Right.
But we, just this past week, for instance, someone came to us and said we need to address conflict in Cameroon. And so, if it's brought to our attention, and if you can give us the resources, we'll get it connected if it's relevant to our work.
Okay. Next up, we've got a couple more people, and then we probably should bring this to a close. So next up will be Frank, and then Sue, and then Quint. And okay, Frank, you are unmuted. Frank? Still can't hear you. I don't hear Frank. Can anybody hear? Sorry, Frank, we may have to catch you next time since we've given it a couple of tries. We're also running out of time, so let me turn it over to Sue. Sue, you are unmuted.
Thank you. We started our initiative here in Fort Collins, a small group of volunteers, by showing the film Scarred Lands and Wounded Lives. And it became very apparent to those of us who saw it how disconnected the environmental movement and environmental advocates are to this whole issue of war and militarism. And so we are trying to put together a program of actually building coalitions and collaborations between peacemakers, environmentalists, and others, this kind of notion of fusion politics that has been brought about by the Poor People's Campaign, with environmental justice and civil rights, and sort of linking movements around this issue and trying to connect the dots between militarism and all these other social issues. So I'm wondering, I guess Greta might be the person to answer this, but what have been your most effective strategies in doing this, in building these bridges between social movements?
Hi, Sue. Thank you so much. You're exactly following the direction that we need to go in. Yeah, you brought up the Poor People's Campaign, and David brought it up earlier. We are one of the partners. I think there are over 100 partners with the new Poor People's Campaign, and we absolutely think this is the direction that organizing needs to go, fusion organizing, as you said. Because really, I think that in organizing, we tend to get stuck in our silos. And I actually speak as a former environmental organizer. I used to work for Food and Water Watch. And it's great environmental organization, but you're absolutely right that people are stuck in their silos, and there was no discussion of the environmental impact of war. But I think that's one of the unique things that World Beyond War brings to the table. If you check out our website, we have the various impacts of war and really how it does touch on all of these factors of society, such as civil rights and poverty and racism in the environment. So absolutely, we've been partnering with the Populous Campaign, sending out emails about their various events and rallies throughout this past month, and we look forward to seeing what they're going to do next after these 40 days of action conclude and how we can help amplify that. And we'll be discussing this issue of intersectionality, you might call it, or fusion organizing at our conference coming up in Toronto as well. And, you know, anything that you're doing, like what you've discussed, we would love to promote it. And I should mention that with all of our volunteer activities, not only do we help with the organizing of it, but we're here to help promote and amplify it to our email list in your region. So do send us that information so we can post it.
And that was the topic, war and the environment and bridging the coalition between the anti-war movement and the environmental movement was the topic of our NORWAR 2017 conference last year. By the way, I've been putting up in the chat links to a lot of the things that we've been referencing. So if you want to find more information, you open your chat window, you can jump right to those things.
Okay, and we have time for one more question. We are a little over time, but I think that's a good thing. So I'm turning this over to Quint.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'd like to make a point in opposition to the gentleman from Cambridge. I was disappointed with some of the comments, and I lived in Cambridge many years myself. I think he was talking about foreign bases from other countries. And I think primarily the only countries that are have bases that have negative impact on the world are United States, United Kingdom, and France. And Russia, as far as I know, has only one base in a foreign country, is in Syria, and it's only using to fighting the terrorists. So I think the equivalence between what the United States is and its allies are doing and with some of the other countries, I don't know China has any bases, perhaps one small one in Djibouti.
Well, John, I think you are, you can still speak if you're still here.
Okay, right. No, I'm very aware that, you know, the U.S. has enormous majority of the bases, and of course it accounts for about half of the total military expenditure worldwide. However, I think from a sort of rhetorical standpoint of reaching people beyond the choir here in the United States, especially given how uninformed they are, and especially now with all this stuff about, you know, Russia allegedly meddling in U.S. elections, just even if it's only, say, one Russian base outside Russia proper, you know, to name that, I think is a good way of showing that WorldBeyond an organization is...
No, because if Russia closes its base in Syria, Syria will be overtaken by the terrorists. So that's actually a beneficial base rather than a negative base.
I don't know. I have to say, I think to me that is somewhat arguable. You know, what I think to me...
Well,
Syria would be ruled by ISIS without Russian help.
Well, can I take over here? I actually think there's probably a really good discussion to be had here. It's just unfortunate that it's the end of this time. I do think we want to do more webinars. I hope, Quint, you'll be back, and John, you'll be back, and we'll talk about this and other things. Somebody also just asked in chat how we can keep this discussion going, Jeff, that is. And I think this webinar will be one way. But I do think we have to bring this one to an end, and let's make this the first of a good trend. And I hope you'll all be back. Thank you all very much. Think about coming to Toronto in September if you have not already registered. It's going to be something very special. And Leah, would you like to say something?
I just wanted to let everybody know that if you have ideas for topics that you'd like us to have a webinar on, absolutely let us know. If you have a question that didn't get answered or something you want to ask, you can write to us via the website. And please look at the website. There's so much information there.
Yes.
There's tons of things that are good conversation starters. And so anyway, please communicate with us. That's why we're here.
Yes, and again, no better way than to come to Toronto if you can. I know everybody can't. For myself, the way I got involved with World Beyond War is by showing up really on a whim to their last conference. It was a great experience. So that is another good way to do this. Any last thoughts from any of the presenters? I think David had to run. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. This was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Great job,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.